Hello and welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. So happy that you decided to tune in and join us today for another great episode. Today we're going to be speaking about family, and we're very blessed to be joined by Dan Oakes, who is an MED, an LPC, and a family therapist. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dan.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So happy to have you. I know that you have some great topics to speak about today, but before we get started, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit with the viewing audience about yourself and what you do.
Well, I'm a therapist here in town. I'm in private practice. I also work for some nonprofit agencies in town. I work for a New Leaf, which is a large nonprofit mental health agency that contracts with the state for different services for youth. And I've been with them for a long time, but do clinical supervision for them now as well as my private practice.
And you're married, or?
I am. I'm married for 20 years and have 5 kids.
Wonderful.
Wonderful kids.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a great thing. Well, you have your own family and you work with so many different families, so I know you have some great information to share. And as a matter of fact, for you at home today, we're speaking about family, and our first topic is pornography addiction. And this is something that many of you at home may not realize. Maybe you're struggling with it, maybe you know someone that is, and today we have some great information to share with you, because I think this is something that many people don't realize is really becoming an issue and is actually affecting families in the family unit. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, Dan, how is pornography addiction affecting the family unit?
Well, it's really affecting the families because of its accessibility. So many people have open internet right to their house, and so this provides the opportunity for something and an access to pornography in a way that's hasn't been in existence prior to this modern age. And so it makes pornography extremely accessible to everybody. And so we're seeing that penetrate sex lives of couples, sex lives of children as they develop out of natural curiosity. They might find find pornography, and it gives them a distorted view about what sexuality is.
Mm-hmm. And so is it affecting only men? Is it affecting women? Who does it affect? It's
affecting the whole family. So I think the effect that we talk about is the whole effect on the family. Definitely it's affecting men. It's also affecting women. The numbers are smaller than men, but its overall impact on the family structure, the trust and commitment levels in the relationship, the sexual development of the children, their ability to socialize and interact emotionally well with each other. It's really deteriorating that core.
And intimacy, how does it affect a man and woman's intimacy in marriage or in a relationship?
Well, you know, it's interesting because there's kind of a modern spin that somehow pornography is okay, and that modern women should be okay with the fact that their husband look at pornography. And the research is telling us otherwise. The research says that it does affect women, that women feel adverse to it, they feel uncomfortable with it, and they personalize it. They feel like their husband has objectified other women, and they don't feel enough. They feel like they're not attractive enough or can't please him, that he has to have these other stimulants in place. And so it really deteriorates their well-being, and it's difficult in the relationship. It breaks down intimacy in their relationship.
And to realize that a lot of times this doesn't start in a marriage. I'm sure some cases it does. Does this start whenever they're younger? Does it carry on? And how does it affect coming into a relationship and being honest with someone if you have that addiction? And do people actually tell their spouse or their other significant other that they are?
Yeah, most men, for example, have started this addictive behavior long before they were married, and most go into the marriage without disclosing it. So the wife finds herself later in a relationship where she either discovers this with her husband, catches him, or he discloses the issue, and she's kind of feels stuck and betrayed that she got into this relationship without all of the information and not aware of how addicted he was to this behavior and how it would affect their intimacy. So it's a real tragedy for women that go through this, and they suffer a great deal. Many work really hard to try to help their husbands and take care of themselves while their husband goes through a recovery process, if that's what they choose. But the betrayal is strong. Women feel it as a betrayal, and it's very real and very emotionally painful for them.
And the question that I'm sure many people ask, and I know that you probably can't give one answer because every situation is different, but why? Why such a strong addiction to pornography? Why is that such a threshold and such a stronghold in so many people's lives? Well,
I think it's back to the accessibility issue. So, years ago, when pornography wasn't accessible, an adolescent boy or girl even goes through a natural stage of curiosity. I know when I was a boy, I was curious, 11, and I remember looking in the Encyclopedia Britannica and looking at the anatomy section and reading and learning and maybe talking with a friend and eventually talking to other people, and you learn about those things. And I remember specifically the cellophane pages that were in that Encyclopedia Britannica. But today, if an 11-year-old boy, for example, begins to have, when an 11-year-old boy starts to become curious sexually, what's he going to do? He's going to go to Google, and he's going to search for sexual terms or whatnot because of his curiosity. And that there's nothing wrong there. There's no ill intent. It's a natural curiosity. And so that the response he's going to get, though, is going to be a far different response than what I got from Encyclopedia Britannica. They're going to get information and imagery that has nothing to do with normal, healthy sexuality, but they're going to get a library of the most extreme pornography collection in the history of mankind, and that's going to contaminate their experience with sexuality, primarily because it's going to affect them. They're going to feel the pleasure that it creates in the body. The stimulation is going to work, but it's going to happen in a context where it doesn't have another person involved. And so without internet or pornography, as accessible it is, those feelings usually develop in the context of a relationship. A boy likes a girl, he gets nervous and he talks to the girl, and progresses to hand holding. But all of these things have these socially complex situations in them that combine with the sexual interest and that help us in our normal sexual development.
How does that affect the brain and the development of that?
It's great you say that, because the experience, if you talk to, when I work with young men that have had early chronic exposure, they'll say, my experience was very intense, very pleasurable, but they'll say I felt very awkward or confused. It's because the brain really knows. The brain knows that what it wants is connection and attachment. And when it gets only half of that experience, it gets a physiological jolt, so to speak, then the brain knows it's not getting the full experience. And so here's how it affects the brain, is that pornography stimulates the pleasure chemistry of the brain, and it's the feeling primarily associated with those chemicals, oxytocin, adrenaline, dopamine, is a feeling of thrill and excitement. And normal sexual experiences, while they do have some thrill in them, of course, also have a great deal of emotional satisfaction. So you don't get the emotional satisfaction element of the brain function in pornography. And so it makes them hypersensitive and hyper-aware of the chemical element of the brain, and then they're seeking for that kind of stimulus. And as boys grow up or become addictive, their behavior becomes more addictive over time, and they get into their mid-20s or 30s, they almost don't remember what it's like to want emotional contact. They're so fixated on the stimulation, the overstimulation associated with pornography.
What can that lead to, pornography addiction? What can it lead to?
Well, it leads to a lot of things. I'm always talking about the effect of the family, but for the individual, the addictive behavior leads to a diminished ability to feel pleasure in other areas of your life. It leads to frustration and intolerance, and the great research out from Colorado telling us that it diminishes our social skills and our ability to emotionally connect with others.
And so do you feel that this is something that parents can have an influence on, negatively or positively, to either create or to stop or to help? And what does their influence have on children?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think this is the most important element and what I talk about with families and a lot of public speaking engagements that I do are about the protective element and how to protect your kids from pornography and how to teach your kids about sexuality in preparation for the fact that kids are going to grow up and live in this world that's kind of awash in pornography. It's kind of everywhere. And so it requires families to talk to their children about sexuality really, really early. So what we want to prevent is we want to prevent their access to pornography as much as possible. But if they do have an experience with it, we want to prevent that that's going to produce some secretivity, shame, and silence. That a boy or a girl is going to never tell anybody about it and then routinely begin to seek it out for the pleasure and intensity. What we want is for the sexual theme to be so open between the parents and children that we know pretty clearly that if a child has an experience, they're likely to come talk to us about it as parents. They're likely to say, hey, Dad, I was over at Bob's house and I saw some pornography that we had talked about, and I felt what you said I would feel. And it did feel thrilling, and I was a little confused about it. But if they come to us and talk to us, then the relationship that we develop around it helps prevent a secretive nature of sexuality and prevent the issue becoming this silent behavior that nobody knows about and it becomes hidden and shameful to the child. So what parents can do most is to talk to their children early. And I really suggest parents do that around 8 years old. They're having a really open mechanics conversation about helping them understand where babies come from and what sexuality is and the basics, what maybe a kid would learn if he grew up on a farm, because most farm kids know how that happens. And so if they get this basic understanding, they may even be a little bit confused by it, but what we're trying to establish is we're trying to help the child feel that parents are my source for good, healthy sexual information.
But it's taking a modest approach to it and explaining and understanding, and so they get the first dose of what, because I know when I was 8, it was a lot different. You didn't have quite the accessibility that you have now, and it wasn't on television, and it wasn't in magazines, and it wasn't on the radio. I mean, if parents actually sit down and listen to what their kids have, even if they don't allow it in their own home, if they don't know where they are, they still have the accessibility to see it. So coming down to, there's so many things that lead to it, there's so many things that leads to it. It has such a negative effect on the family and on individuals. But if you have a family member, if you have a spouse, if you have a child, if you have a friend that you know is suffering with pornography addiction, what are some steps? I know that every case is different, but what are some steps that people can take to truly reach out and to help someone, and even to confront someone? And how do you do that to know if you're not sure, if you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to not wonder in silence and worry about offense. You want to bring it up. You want to say something about it. You can do it kindly and lovingly, but you talk about your concern, and you maybe research a little bit about where to find help. There's a lot of great programming around. There's definitely Sexual Addictions Anonymous is a great source. There's a lot of community groups for that. There's several outpatient therapy groups around, and regular outpatient therapy with a good counselor that's trained on the issue, that understands it, can really help somebody overcome this addiction. The difficult part with pornography addiction is that because sexuality is a natural thing, a little bit unlike heroin addiction or cocaine addiction or drug addiction, sexuality is so natural to us that sometimes there's a great deal of denial around that issue. And there's enough political movement in our culture that says that it's okay, that sometimes there's a fair amount of denial at the beginning about the intensity. But the signs there to determine are about whether somebody struggles to stop, to want to stop and then can't. They feel a diminished ability to feel pleasure in other areas of their life. It's affecting major life areas. But to encourage those that we are concerned about to get help, because help is available.
And it's important to let people know that this isn't something that if they are watching and they do feel this sense of guilt, they're not alone. This is a major issue that's happening with people in the community,
Absolutely.
with people of faith, with people of all sorts of things. This is affecting everyone.
It's definitely an epidemic in our culture, where we've become so full of sexual stimulus and pornography, and the themes on television get more and more risky. that sexuality is unavoidable. It's kind of always in our face in a way that it never has been before.
So just understand that you're not alone, and if you do feel something, you know, seek out help, because it is something that can lead to problems in your marriage or to your future. But thank you so much, Dan, for sharing about this very interesting topic that many people probably usually feel uncomfortable speaking about, even though we see things in our everyday life. So just speak to a family member, speak to someone, and know that you can get help. So if you have any questions, I know that Dan would be happy to answer them. It's Dan Oakes. He is an MED and LPC, a therapist, and his phone number is 480-382-1257. The email is danoakeslpc@gmail.com and danoakeslpc.com. And so you know that's spelled O-A-K-E-S. I spelled that wrong as well the first time. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll be right back after this short message. Thank you.
My name is Amanda. I'm 21 years old. I have lots of friends that use tanning beds that lay out in the sun all the time, and I tell them about Jamie. Jamie was in her early 20s when she was diagnosed with melanoma, and she died right before she turned 30. People think tanning is safe. I don't think it's safe. You could die just like Jamie did.
This message is brought to you by the American Academy of Dermatology.
Hello and welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. So happy you decided to stay with us. If you just happen to be joining us, we are here with Dan Oakes, and he is a therapist, and we are speaking about family. Thank you so much, Dan, for staying with us.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you taking the time to be here and share some great things. We just got done speaking about a great topic, and now we're going to move on to our second one, which is parenting and attachment. This is something, I've heard this word in several things and whenever I studied psychology, but I think it's something that we really don't necessarily understand as a general public. What is attachment?
Well, attachment is the general feeling of love and connectedness that we have with those that are important to us in our life. You know, primarily that's initially with our mothers, our fathers, our siblings, and extended family, but will it grow as we get into our teenage years? Those attachment relationships grow to our best friends and the people we hang out with, that we form identities with, and then eventually to our committed relationships, to marriages, to boyfriends, to girlfriends.
Mm-hmm. And so how does that have an effect on parenting?
Well, it's important to know that the research is really telling us new things about this, that our ability to emotionally regulate and a child's ability to learn emotional regulation comes through their attached relationships. This is where we learn to deal with tension, stress, difficulty, is based on the security of our attachments with our primary caregivers. And later in our life, based on our healthy attachments that we have in our everyday life. And when our attachments are threatened, or we struggle with our attachment relationships, we have a difficult time emotionally regulating, which means we're more likely to panic, we're more likely to engage in behavior that would be inappropriate or spontaneous or difficult. And as we repair our attachment relationships or maintain our attachment relationships, we develop emotional resilience.
And so do you find that this affects the parents more or the children? Because parents are always going to have that attachment, and the kids start to grow up, and like you said, they start to grow identities through other people and through their surroundings. How does it affect the parents and children's relationship?
The important part is that parents recognize that attachment has to come first. For example, in discipline, if it's important that during our disciplinary process, if we're correcting our child, that we maintain healthy attachment during the discipline. If, for example, I am harsh or intense or abusive during discipline, my child's not going to hear the discipline because they can't emotionally regulate. And if there's all of this tension there, the child can't feel the correction that comes with love. It's interesting, there's some core behaviors that create attachment, and they are, so I'm going to paraphrase them a little bit. Eye contact, smile, and facial expression, touch, tone, movement and gesture, and sugar.
Oh, wow.
Right. These are the things that the neurologists and researchers tell us create attachment. So if I'm going to correct my child, I want to make sure that I have good eye contact with them, that I have a soft tone, and that I know as an adult that if I regulate my emotions well, and I can correct and discipline in a loving way, that my child's likely to hear the discipline. But if I am harsh or yelling or screaming or have a negative facial expression or hard tones, they're going to emotionally dysregulate, and they're not going to hear the correction. What they're going to feel is my attachment is threatened with my parent, and I'm not going to be able to integrate information that comes from them in this moment.
How interesting. So that goes to, I've heard so many people say you have to teach with love and you have to teach with kindness. Yelling at them, sending them to their rooms, not going to do anything. It's essentially going to create a rebellion. Why does it create that reaction from kids to where they, whenever they start to get a little bit older, they start to get mouthy and start to talk off? Does that have an effect on that?
Yeah, sure. The rebellious feeling, the mouthy, while this is some of it's very normative for teenagers, it's dysregulation. This is behavior that comes from emotional dysregulation, and it means that I am not emotionally attached at the moment. Wow. And I have to recreate that attachment with our children. Now, you can send your child to the room, but you stay emotionally regulated, you stay calm, and we have to model for them. If we blow up and emotionally dysregulate ourselves, we teach our children to blow up. And they can't integrate any information that we want to give them that might help them, to help them understand why there's a consequence for this behavior or why they shouldn't do A, B, or C. We want to stay calm and be loving and let that information be strong. It doesn't mean that we can't be firm.
And so if a child messes up and they do something wrong, what is the best way for a parent to approach it? And let's say they do get angry. Some people have tempers, some people get upset. How do they handle that? How do they handle their child if they did something wrong?
The child gets angry, the parent gets angry.
The parent.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the parent has to recognize that their anger is a representation of their own dysregulation. Mm-hmm. They have to take a minute and calm down before they respond to the child. Now, I'm not saying that's always going to work. I certainly have gotten mad at my children and made mistakes, but we have to acknowledge it as a mistake. If I'm going to lash out at my child in frustration and anger, I have to acknowledge that as a mistake. I can't play this game like, well, as long as I'm the parent, it's okay for me to be insulting or harsh or intense, because I wouldn't tolerate that of my children. So it's not okay for me, but I have to acknowledge it as a mistake. I can apologize to my kids and say, even though I did that wrong, your behavior was still wrong as well. But we have to reestablish an emotional attachment and connection. And
so what's the best way for a parent to discipline their child? What do you see as a therapist if they, not necessarily discipline, but if their child does something wrong, what's the best way to approach it? Is timeouts, is a conversation, it's taking away things? What is the best way?
So I'm going to say that there's lots of different styles of discipline and parenting. And I think what I'm saying is that many of them are effective. But whatever one we pick and choose, we want to have these principles of attachment included in it, so that if I'm going to put my child on a timeout, or if I'm going to ground them, or if I'm going to, whatever I'm going to do, I want to work really hard to maintain attachment on my end, so that they feel, now they might get upset. The best thing a parent can do is when the child gets upset about a consequence is to stay calm. What we do sometimes is we don't tolerate any frustration. Well, don't you talk back to me, and not that talking back is good, but we want to demonstrate to the child that we stay emotionally regulated even though there's conflict nearby.
And does a parent's relationship affect the attachment with the children and the way that they interact with each other?
Absolutely. And sometimes the tension going on between a husband and wife comes out on the children. This is a great triangulation. A parent will be mad. They'll correct the kids at the father. The dad will yell at the children, but really be talking to the mother. So it's important that we maintain a healthy relationship with our spouse, and not to take our frustrations that are going on in our marital relationship out on our children. And we have to be honest about that.
And so what's the best way to maintain a healthy relationship and attachment with people's children as they start to grow up and as they start to get older?
Well, it's about the core principles of behavior that I talked about. Those core behaviors are called core behaviors because they exist in other bigger everyday behaviors, like, for example, nurturing talk. So nurturing talk is a language structure that includes gratitude and appreciation, questions of concern. And so when we exercise nurturing talk with others, it's absent criticism, absent defensiveness. We talk in a way that is nurturing to them. And this will have the tone in it and typically some eye contact and the smile, those raw attachment behaviors that maintain healthy attachment. And then anxieties tend to come down and healthy attachment is present. We can emotionally regulate. So nurturing talk is one method or tool to make sure that attachment is coming in. So if I'm going to correct my child, I might tell them a few things they've done right, but I definitely identify what they did that was wrong, let them know that I love them, and my goal is to correct that behavior.
And what can parents do to anticipate the lack of attachment as their kids start to grow up? What can they do to help themselves, especially a mother? A lot of times moms that stay at home, that becomes their life, and they're like, no, I can't let you go. I mean, I'm sure that's something you even see a lot.
Sure.
What can they do to prepare for that?
I think the most important thing parents can do is take care of themselves. Sometimes we get so busy and so stressed and frustrated in life that we don't take care of ourselves, and then when some conflict comes up with our child, we get dysregulated very quickly. So we have to do a lot of self-care. We have to make sure we're getting enough sleep, that we're eating well, that we exercise a little bit, that we are getting some time for ourselves and engage in an interest or two and have some time with friends. And we have to balance our life in this way so that we know who we are and we know who our children is. There's clean boundaries about that.
So your children don't become your identity. I'm sure that's
Correct,
where a lot
absolutely.
of it becomes a problem. Well, Dan, thank you. It's been such great information that you've shared with our audience. And what do you have one just last quick bit of advice to parents that have children, maybe if they have young children at home, just to be good parents?
The big advice is that you can be firm without being angry. And that's kind of a cultural issue in the Western world, is that correction has to come with some aggressiveness, and that's not the case.
And discipline isn't a bad thing if it's done correctly.
Absolutely not. It's necessary.
Yeah, it is. And children want guidance.
They do.
And that's something I think people don't realize. And and also I think it's also taking time as parents in such a busy world. Sometimes parents probably almost get lazy in essence and don't want to take the time. So don't get angry if you come home from work and you're frustrated. Breathe before you go yell at your children, and approach them with love, and it will definitely pay off in the end as they grow up and go to be parents themselves one day. So thank you again, Dan. If you have any questions, I know that Dan would be happy to answer them, or his office. It's Dan Oakes. He is an MED and LPC, a therapist, and it's a private practice. The number is 480-382-1257. The email is danoakeslpc@gmail.com, and the website is danoakeslpc.com. Thank you so much for watching at home. I hope that this has been a great program for you. We really spoke about some topics that will be affecting you in your everyday life. And if you're not a parent yet, you have one, and one day you will be. So reach out, love someone, love your family. Realize that you never know when the last time is you'll see them. And we look forward to seeing you next time right here on Joy in Our Town.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and made possible by your telephone dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town brought to your home every day. So write Joy in Our Town, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 927.